Hello and welcome back to season 3, episode 1 of Monday Madness. But I don't actually think I'm going to make it episode 1. It's just season 3, first episode of Monday Madness. Let's go with that. Let's rock with that. I'm actually very excited for today's episode because I know it is one of my most requested. And it's actually my first ever two-parter. So that's exciting. I won't leave you guys in suspense for too long. I've got my notes here. I did get an inbox the other day asking how I sort my case stuff out. Oh, I've just dropped this is the podcast folder for 2026 eps. So if you're watching the visuals, you'll see it's a binder, but I'll describe it to my audio listeners. It is like a thick-ass fucking binder that is full of all the episode scripts and structures and just all the bits and pieces that I'm going to do, basically. So I will not leave you guys in suspense for too much longer. We're going to rip into today's episode. But I will note that if you haven't already listened to our first episode of the Byron Bay murders, please go back and listen to that so you can see and hear what we've already covered. But today I am bringing you a part 2 episode of the Byron Bay murders. This is hands down one of the most requested cases I've ever gotten, is all of these Byron Bay disappearances, murders, suicides, all of these things that happen in Byron that just don't make sense. And even not just Byron itself, but pretty much that whole scattered hinterland area. So today we're not redoing any of part 1. Today we're going to basically be covering all that we couldn't cover in that first episode. Today is for all the stories that we didn't quite get to. Now we have quite a lot to cover today, so we're going to get straight into our first case, which is the case of Simone Strobel. Now Simone was a 25-year-old German backpacker and she was a kindergarten teacher. She was actually traveling to Australia from Bavaria and she was traveling with her boyfriend Tobias. Now at this point they had decided to go and do the classic Aussie backpacker thing, the work, travel, van life, hostels, all of that. They arrived in Australia in 2004. They did the entire East Coast run, worked on farms and stayed in backpacker spots. And by early 2005, they ended up in Lismore. Now, Lismore is around 45 minutes away from the Byron area. Not Byron exactly, but in the same backpacker sort of circuit. So a lot of people do stay in Byron, or they go inland to Lismore, or they'll go to Nimbin for a bit. And they sort of drift backwards and forwards to the coast. So in early 2005, Simone and Tobias checked into the Lismore Tourist Caravan Park and they were staying within their camper van near the local showground. On the night of the 11th of February 2005, they'd gone out drinking at a local pub with friends. CCTV shows them like any other backpacker group, laughing, drinking, nothing dramatic. Now, at some point after midnight, they all head back to the caravan park. Now, the story from this point kind of depends on who you ask. The group's version is basically that they all walked back. People went to bed at different times, so at some point in the early hours, Simone supposedly stormed off after an argument, and then by morning, she was gone. Now, Tobias had then gone on to report her missing later that day. Police searched and scoured the caravan park, the nearby showground, the surrounding areas, but nothing. There was absolutely no sign of Simone. So about 6 days later, a local man walking his dog at the Lismore Sports Ground, which is important to note, literally right near the caravan park, noticed a strange smell that was coming from behind a low fence. Now, when he looked closer, he noticed something laying under palms and cardboard. Unfortunately, what was laying underneath was Simone's body. Now, her body was found hidden behind the fence line about 90 metres from where she had last been seen. She was naked, arranged, and covered over vegetation and rubbish. Pathologists later went on to say she died of suffocation, but her exact cause of death couldn't be pinned down clearly. There was no obvious signs of sexual assault. So police went on to quickly focus on the people that were with Simone that night, especially Tobias. He was the boyfriend, he was there, and his story about Simone walking off didn't fully make sense when you realise She was found basically around the corner. So there were many inconsistencies in how the group had described that night. Questions about how they thoroughly searched and why no one noticed anything in that area, despite it being right near the campground. But unfortunately, the overall evidence found was pretty thin. There was no CCTV footage that was shown of her leaving, no eyewitnesses seen her alone. The body had been outside for days in hot, wet conditions, which destroyed a lot of forensic clues. Now, the first coronial inquest was done in 2007, and that suggested that Simone was unlawfully killed. And it did suggest that it was someone she knew responsible, but it didn't name anyone in particular. And a $250,000 reward was eventually increased to $1 million for information. But still no breakthrough. So now we're going to fast forward to 2002, because this was 17 years after Simone died. New South Wales police did what her family had been begging for. They extradited Tobias back to Australia and charged him with her murder. German authorities arrested him and he was brought to New South Wales. It felt like finally the case was going somewhere. But then in 2003, prosecutors quietly dropped the charges, saying the evidence wasn't strong enough for a realistic chance of conviction. No trial, no verdict, and again, no closure. But then in 2025, a fresh inquest was held. The coroner again found that Simone was the victim of homicide. She was deliberately killed and her body was deliberately hidden. But it still didn't name a perpetrator at all. The inquest confirmed what everybody already knew. She didn't get drunk and pass out. She didn't just wander off. Someone did this to her. But unfortunately, legally, that's where it all stops. So in this, we have a young woman, a kindergarten teacher, who just wanted to see the world. And the official line is basically that yes, she was murdered. No, we cannot tell you who did it. Her family have had to fly back to Germany with that information. And why is this in the Byron Bay episode, you may be wondering? Because if you look at a map of northern New South Wales, Byron, Lennox, Lismore, Nimbin, they're all in the same fucking web. Same backpacker routes, same roads, same culture of you'll be fine, just vibe, go with the stranger. And unfortunately, Simone is now a part of that pattern, whether the tourist board likes it or not. Now, the next one is a case that honestly makes my blood boil. Bronwyn Winfield. Bronwyn was a 31-year-old mother of two young girls. This was back in 1993 and she was living in Lennox Head, which is just south of Byron Bay. People who knew her described her as warm and loving, but also worn down. She was in a rocky marriage and there was later claims of domestic violence, money stress, and control within the relationship. Now, on May 16th of 1993, Bronwyn vanished. Now, her husband went on to tell the police she'd left the family home after an argument and never came back. Basically, the overall story was that she'd walked out on the marriage and abandoned her children. Now, that is the version of this story that sat for years. But when you start pulling up at the threads, it doesn't really fucking add up. Bronwyn was extremely close to her daughters. People who knew her said that there was no way she would have just left them and never ever contacted them again. And she was about to start a brand new job, something she'd been really excited about. And then she'd never shown up. Now, after she left, her bank accounts were never touched again. No withdrawals and no evidence that she'd gone to start a new life. Her car was left behind and several personal items too. Basically, everything that screams to us this woman did not voluntarily disappear. Now, it took almost a decade before the justice system really looked at her case properly. In 2002, a colonial inquest heard from friends, family, and neighbours. Witnesses spoke about Bronwyn being frightened, about marital problems, and about things that had happened in the lead up to her disappearance. The coroner found that Bronwyn was dead, that she did not choose to vanish voluntarily, and she likely died as a result of the actions of a person known to her. But again, I just want to be clear that nobody was charged. The DPP decided that the evidence wasn't quite strong enough to go ahead. So for the next 20 plus years, her daughters grew up like this. Black hole, no body, no charges, and just the narrative floating around their mum that left. Now recently, Bronwyn's case has been back in the media because of her daughters, especially Crystal. There's been podcast coverage, Hello. News features and comparisons to other high-profile domestic violence-linked disappearances, where husbands were eventually charged decades later. Police have said they're reviewing the case again, with fresh eyes and modern forensics, but as of now, no new charges have been laid. It is officially still an unresolved, suspected homicide. But this is what really gets me with Bronwyn's story, is if a young mum disappears from a coastal suburban town, leaves her kids, leaves her car, leaves her job, and never uses her bank again, how is it the first assumption that she just walked out? Now, it's the same pattern that we keep seeing up and down this coastline. Women vanish and families say this isn't her. And the system shrugs it off and goes, maybe she just took off. Now, Bronwyn, in the grand scheme of things, should have had a completely different life. She should have watched her girls grow up. But instead, her case is sitting in that grey area where everyone quietly agrees that it was probably murder. But no one has been held accountable. And again, Lennox Head is right there, right beside Byron. Same region, same police commands, same cultural blind spots. So another one that I don't think gets talked about enough, but it absolutely should, is Lois Martha Roberts. Lois was an Aboriginal woman born around 1960s, twin sister of a well-known arts administrator and broadcaster, Rhonda Roberts, and the daughter of pastor and activist Frank Roberts. She grew up around Lismore in northern New South Wales. In her 20s, she was badly injured in a car accident and suffered permanent brain damage. But she was still independent in a lot of ways. She lived on her own and tried to build a life for herself, even with those challenges. Now, on July 31st in 1998, Lois was last seen outside the Nimbin police station. After that, nothing. It's reported that she was probably hitchhiking between Nimbin and Lismore, which a lot of people did and still do. At some point on that road, someone picked her up. And what happened next is one of the most brutal unsolved crimes in the region. So about 6 months later, in January 1999, a bushwalker in Wean State Forest near Doonan, I think I said that right. So we are talking deep, thick bush in the hinterland, came across some human remains off a fire trail. Now these were the remains of Lois. Reports say that she had been tortured and abused before being killed. Her body was so badly mutilated. She was dumped deep within the forest, far from the road, in a place you wouldn't just stumble across unless you knew the area. Now, an inquest was held in 2002. The coroner returned an open finding, meaning yes, she was murdered, but there wasn't enough evidence to identify who had done it. No one has ever been charged in Lois's case. Now, Lois's family, especially her twin sister Rhonda, and they have spoken openly about how her case does expose the dirty little secrets of the North Coast, how violence against Aboriginal women is too often ignored, and how this system doesn't respond with the same urgency, how crimes like this fall in the too hard basket once the news cycle moves on. Now, there is a documentary out called A Sister's Love, and it looks at Lois's murder and the impact that it had on her family. It's raw and it's rather heartbreaking. It really drives home that Lois wasn't just another case. She was a daughter, a twin, and a mum. She had an entire community who loved her. And to this very day, her killer or killers have never been identified. Somewhere out there, there is someone who picked up an Aboriginal woman near Nimbin, tortured her, killed her, dumped her in the bush, and then walked away. So again, Lois's story sits right in the same Northern Rivers corridor. Nimbin, Lismore, Byron, the rainforest roads between them. It's the same region, the same era, the same pattern of vulnerable people being harmed and then forgotten. Okay, my wonderful little besties, we're actually going to move a little bit deeper now. We're going to move to some more not so well known, and I mean most of these are pretty unknown, but we're going to move to even more unknown cases. These are the ones that have truly slipped through the cracks, the names that families still whisper and still beg for answers. These are the stories that never really got the headlines they deserve, and the disappearances that feel like they have been swallowed by the coastline itself. So the next case we're going to talk about is Sharon Phillips. Now, Sharon's case is technically Brisbane-based, but police have believed that the offender may have ties along the Queensland and New South Wales border, including the Northern Rivers. So Sharon was 20 years old and she was driving home from work when her car had run out of petrol. She called her boyfriend from a payphone nearby, and that was her last known contact. Witnesses saw a man in a yellow vehicle hanging around the scene. Other witnesses say they saw Sharon talking to someone, and then it appears she just vanished. So why this may link to our Byron case is because police have long suspected that the offender may have been a long-haul truck driver who travelled along the corridor into New South Wales on a regular basis. Now, multiple women later reported being approached or followed by similar men in the same area. Sharon's remains have unfortunately never been found. So our next case is Morgan Shepherd. So Morgan Shepherd was 17 years old and from Ballina, which is just 25 minutes from Byron Bay. He was last seen walking near Richmond River after a night out. Witnesses saw him talking to a man in a ute. Morgan's shoes were found, his phone, but his body has never been located. Police at the time suggested it as a possible drowning, but locals refused that explanation. Morgan was such a strong swimmer, and the river conditions that night weren't dangerous at all. His disappearance still remains unsolved. Now, the next one is Annette and Sylvia Murphy. Now, this one is basically forgotten at a national level, and I think it's one of the earliest in the region. So sisters Annette, 7, and Sylvia, 5, vanished while playing near Lennox Heads. Their disappearances sparked one of the biggest searches in New South Wales history. The official line for decades was drowned. But here's what the locals still talk about. No clothes ever washed ashore. No remains were ever found, and no witnesses saw them near the water. However, there was a sedan that was reported nearby and appeared to be quite suspicious. Now, even now, many long-term residents within that area do believe they were abducted. Their case still remains open to this day. So these cases don't really have an official name, these next ones. But if we talk to the people who lived in Byron in the 80s and 90s, they'll tell you the same stories. Young travellers staying in hostels or coastal motels who vanished after night outs. So these are the cases of the backpacker motel. Now, these happened between the 1980s and the 1990s. So Dutch backpacker Elsa, whose name has been locked and blocked at the family's request, was 20 years old. Last seen leaving a hostel near Lawson Street. Her backpack was found near the bushes 6 days later. Her passport was still inside. And unfortunately, her body has never been discovered. Now, the next one is a uni student from Melbourne, Australia. Again, the name has been redacted or blocked at the family's request. 22 years old, travelling alone and last seen drinking with 2 men at the Rails, which is a popular Byron Bay bar. Sorry, there's lots of peas flying around there. Witnesses later said that she did appear to be uncomfortable. She'd left, but unfortunately never made her way back to the hostel. And unfortunately, her case literally went cold within months. Now, in 1994, there was another German traveller who was a 19-year-old male visiting Byron for only 2 nights. He left his hostel for a walk at 9 p.m. and then never returned. His wallet was found in a storm drain 2 suburbs away. And it's really important to be clear that all of these cases by police were chalked up to travellers have moved on, misadventure, lost in the bush. But the families insist that they did not vanish voluntarily. So another case isn't from Byron directly, but I think it's important to mention, and this is the case of Samantha Knight. So this is one of Australia's most infamous missing child cases. It's a Sydney-based case, but investigators have connected her offender to the Northern Rivers corridor. So Samantha was only 9 years old and she was taken in broad daylight from Bondi. So her killer, Michael Guider, lived periodically between northern New South Wales, often staying around Ballina and Byron during the 1980s. Now, he had kept diaries, drawings and maps referencing isolated beaches near Lennox Heads. Unfortunately, Samantha's body has never been found, but some detectives do believe that she may have been buried somewhere along the coast between Ballina and Byron. So now we're going to talk about some of the Nimbin cases because these were from the 1990s to the 2000s. Nolene Baker was the first one. Nolene was a woman in her 40s and she was quite known locally. She vanished after walking into the bushland for a short afternoon walk. And again, like all the other stories, she never came out. No trace has ever been found. Bush trackers said the disappearance pattern was inconsistent with a lost hiker. Now, this next one is called the Longhouse case. So, two backpackers living in a communal lodge in Yuki vanished within 6 months of each other. A German woman, 21, was last seen hitchhiking, and a Canadian man, 25, last seen walking towards a forest track. New South Wales police eventually linked both to a possible homicide, but no suspects have ever been found. Now, the next one is called the Nimbin hitchhiker. This was an 18-year-old woman who had accepted a ride from Lismore to Nimbin. However, she never arrived. Witnesses later reported a white van pulled over for her. Her bag was then found in a creek, but she has never been located. Now, if you guys are wondering why I'm not saying some names, I am going to put the names below of the ones that I can, but some of these names have been redacted, again, at the family's request. So finding the full story is hard. And again, it's also because the police just brush these off, so they never got the coverage they deserve. So a lot of these cases just, you can't find the information that you should be able to find. So the next lot is the Tallow Beach Run. So between 2007 and 2015, there's lots of unexplained drownings. The same area that's connected to Theo Hayes. So if you listen to our first episode, you know all about Theo. So at least 5 young men have disappeared along a 3K stretch over 8 years. Now, only 2 bodies have ever been recovered and the others have just vanished completely. Now, families have completely disputed the misadventure rulings, pointing out calm surf conditions, belongings left neatly nearby, inconsistent coroner notes, similar age groups between 18 to 25, and similar timelines. All of these appeared to be quite late at night. Like, that's important to note in terms of timelines. So a lot of families have disputed that all the timelines are far too similar to just be a coincidence. Now, some investigators now do believe that these may be linked. Others are in complete denial. Now, the next lot of cases are called the Brunswick Heads Cluster. 3 women in the 1990s, all living in or near Brunswick Heads, which is Brunswick Heads in New South Wales. So again, along that coastline of Byron, disappeared or were found deceased under suspicious conditions. So there was a woman in her 20s in 1993 that was found in the mangroves. Her cause of death was ruled uncertain, and her case has been quietly closed. Another 17-year-old in 1995 was last seen walking home from work and then never seen again. A local cleaner in 1998 was found deceased near Tiagra, ruled non-suspicious, but family insists the injuries did not match that ruling. All 3 were within a 5K circle. Now, there was another man from Lennox Head. Sorry, I've always struggled with that one. But this is another area that's close to that Byron area. He was only 19 years old when he vanished after leaving a house party. His friends say that when he left, he seemed sober, happy, and normal. Police again use the same tune that they normally use, and they have used a lot throughout these cases, is that he likely just left to start a new life. His shoes were found near a fire trail months later, but there have been no further leads since. Now, I don't think I said at the start too, that case was from 2005. There was also a case of an unidentified woman from the mid-2000s. So the local SES volunteers claimed an unidentified body was found in bushland near Killen Falls in the early 2000s. There was no public record, no missing persons report matched, and some believed it was one of the early Newcastle girls. Others think it may have been a tourist. Now, this case is ruled to have been buried by an overlap. Okay, so when we really, really start to zoom out, I know I've just overloaded you guys, and I think you can understand why I had to try to fly through those, not fly through them, but why I had to try to get through them in a consistent manner. When we're really zooming out, this is not 5 cases, it's not 10 cases, this is dozens of cases across 5 decades, across a stretch of coast that has been treated as safe and carefree for so many years. But all of these disappearances are starting to say otherwise. So I'm going to give you guys a couple more cases and then we're going to wrap up today's episode. I will probably more than likely need to do a part 3 if I'm being completely honest, because I think this whole Byron Bay thing has a lot of moving parts and I also think it keeps moving each year. I think it just, and I'm hoping it's going to start to move in a good direction, if that makes sense. Like it's not going to keep moving to more and more cases because this is getting insane. So another case was Jasmine Holden from 1991. Jazz was a 20-year-old British backpacker who was traveling solo. She had fell in with a spiritual group in the Northern Rivers, a commune that promised healing, meditation, and returning to the earth. She left the commune one afternoon for a walk into town. However, she was never seen again. Her passports and belongings remained untouched. So members of the commune actually gave quite inconsistent statements. Some claimed that she wandered into the bush. Her parents flew from the UK repeatedly, but nothing ever occurred. The police files do list this case as a homicide. So another one was Linda Reed in 1983. Linda was 21 years old and she was hitchhiking from North to Sydney. Witnesses saw her get into a car near Kempsey. Days later, her body was found near Coffs Harbour, sexually assaulted, violently beaten, and dumped. Police believe a serial predator was using that Pacific Highway to pick up women. Anne Marie Thompson from 1986. Anne Marie was only 17 years old and was hitchhiking south towards Coffs. She was last seen near a service station. Her body was found partially buried in the bushland just outside town. Now, this one was a different victim profile and a different direction of town, but overall same MO. Hitchhiker, young woman, abducted near a highway, murdered and dumped in the bushland. Police have never linked these two publicly, but locals have always believed the same predator has attacked both. Now, this is why people really do believe the Byron Bay corridor theory. The exact same crimes were happening all up and down that Pacific Highway. Another one was the water tank woman. So in 2002, a woman's body was found concealed in a rainwater tank on a rural Northern River property. And she has never been positively identified. She was believed to be in her late teens to early 20s, possibly hitchhiking, possibly European or Canadian. The cause of death could not be determined due to the decomposition. The property owner denied ever knowing her, and no one has ever been charged in her case. Police eventually listed this as a suspicious death, undetermined. Translation? I'm going to translate for you guys. We don't know what happened. We can't prove it. Case closed. Because that seems to be the common tune in our Byron series, right? It's just the common play. But again, we've got a young woman with no ID, no match, and no answers. And another one in the grand scheme of things that's swallowed by the coastline. So Sally Ann, or Sal, from 1999 is another one. She was found buried in shallow sand off a coastal walking trail. She was 26 years old and a local. Police initially called it misadventure, but her family have insisted on her being attacked. There was another case of an unidentified male who was also found in the same reserve 2 years later, also buried, also suspicious, and also dismissed quickly. Locals believed the two were definitely linked. Another body was found in a pine forest outside Grafton, just between Byron and Coffs. A forestry worker discovered the skeletal remains of a young woman. So her body or remains were found in the mid-90s, but the coroner did estimate that she was killed between 1993 and 1996. Her bones showed signs of blunt force trauma, and to this day there has still never been a name, a suspect, no link, and no closure. It is believed that she had been hitchhiking throughout the region. So it is really horrifying when we again zoom out on how many unidentified women and men show up in this pattern. It feels like this corridor is full of ghosts and girls that are never going to get their name back. So when we actually look at just part 2 alone, not even counting the other cases that we've already covered, you can see exactly why families and investigators are screaming for something bigger. These are not just once-offs, runaways, misadventures, or accidents. And they're all within the same region, all within the same victim type, all within the same decades. This is not paranoia. It really does feel like a pattern. Okay, so now that we've actually gone through all of these cases from New South Wales to Byron to Lismore to the forest and to the highways in between, let's sit with one big question. Are these cases actually connected? And here's the frustrating but honest answer, is maybe and maybe not. But there is too much overlap for us to simply just ignore. Now, I could keep yapping, but I'm not going to bore the shit out of you guys. So I'm going to put some geographical sort of layouts of the locations of these so that you guys can get a feel and decide for yourselves if you think they're connected. Because at the end of the day, I can't give you that answer. No one can. They tell you they can, they can't. Now, along with that, I'm also going to put the victim profile and our police response so that you guys can have a, I guess, educated guess on whether you believe, again, if they're linked. I'm going to put all that below. Have a read. I won't bore the shit out of you because I've already been yapping for an extremely long time. Okay. So deep breath, because I know part 2 was quite a heavy one and I know it was a lot of information to absorb. But that is your Monday Madness episode. Thank you for sticking with me through part 2. I won't take up too much more of your time, I promise. But definitely go and do something for yourself now. Take care of yourself. I hope to see you guys all next episode. But until then, please stay curious, stay aware, and always trust your gut. I love you. Bye.